What is my biggest worry for this Wisconsin Badgers football program?
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making this your first listen every day. Thank you for being an everydayer. Thank you for being a part of this community. I say it all the time, man. There's a million things you could be doing with your time. Thank you for spending a little bit of it here with us. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. All right. I think I want to have just kind of a real talk here for a second. Because I think one of the faults maybe that I have, and something maybe I don't do a good enough job of, is when you do a daily show, you really focus on a lot of the minutia. We're talking about the right guard. We're talking about special teams. We're grading players, Pro Football Focus grade. What's the next opponent? What do we got to do there? What's the next thing that's going to happen? And I don't know if we zoom out enough. And that's on me. Listen, it's on me. So if we zoom out and really take a look at this program and what I'm worried about, where I'm at, where are we at as a community? Because again, that matters a lot to me as well. If we really zoom out, what is my biggest worry for this program? This is something I've been thinking about a little bit, right? Because this is a program I've followed since I was a kid. My kid is getting into football, and he's watching Badger games with me. It's a big deal if they're better. Like, it's more enjoyable for him. He gets into it. And I think my biggest worry is mediocrity. If I'm going to be completely honest, if we're going to zoom out, and this show is going to be more zooming out. I got some questions from the Discord. If you're in the chat, feel free to throw whatever you want in the chat. We'll try to get to it all today. But this show is really going to zoom out a little bit. Let's take a little bit of a bigger picture look at this. And I actually think my biggest worry for this program is mediocrity. It's not whether or not Luke Fickell's the guy. Like, if this thing goes off the rails and he's definitely not the guy, there is a value in bottoming out, because when you bottom out, you at least know what you're doing doesn't work whatsoever, and we can move on, right? If you're in a relationship and he's terrible, he or she is terrible, right? They're eating all your Cheetos, they're not refilling the snack drawer, they're stealing your car. It's easy to leave that person. I can't believe, like, my number one reason was they're eating all your Cheetos. I mean, there's probably bigger deals than that in relationships. That tells you how great my wife is. Like, there's probably bigger deals than that. But my point is, it's really easy to leave someone or to leave a partnership, whether it's business, relationship, whatever it is, when it's really not working, when it's really obvious. My worry is the rest of this year is going to go on doing whatever it does. It's a tough schedule. We're going to win 4 games, 3 games, whatever it is. And then next year, the schedule lightens up. It really does. When you look at next year's Big Ten schedule, you get Purdue, you get UCLA, you get Rutgers, you get Maryland, you get Michigan State. You miss Ohio State next year. You miss Penn State next year, I think, right? You definitely miss Michigan. You definitely missed Oregon. Actually, I think we play Penn State next year. But my point is, the schedule lightens up a lot next year. And there's a chance we're better next year just because the schedule lightens up. Maybe you get quarterback health. Maybe these younger pieces come together. The offensive line can't be this bad again. It can't be. But does that mean we're really better? Or are we going to get better next year because of all these other factors? Nothing really changes. And then we get into mediocrity. And then when you're in mediocrity, it's hard sometimes to make a change. Like, again, going back to the relationship analogy, when you're in a really bad relationship, it's kind of easy sometimes to say, this is terrible, I'm out. When you're in something that's kind of okay-ish, sometimes it's hard to get out of that. That's my biggest fear for this program. Like, if it's almost better if this is just a total dumpster fire and then you can move on. But I don't think we're moving on at the end of this year. Well, I'm going to talk about the buyout in a little bit. And again, this is more of a big picture show. I don't think we're moving on because I think the buyout's a real thing at Wisconsin. At other schools, it wouldn't be. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that's holding this up, but I think it's a real factor for Wisconsin. I'm telling you. So if you don't move on this year for whatever reason, the buyout's there, next year it gets better. Does that mean it's solved, or did next year just get better because the schedule lined up and then you move on to 2027 and you don't really change anything and you get further and further away from the core concept of what is Wisconsin, and you get in this spiral of mediocrity that just makes it difficult to break out of? And with mediocrity comes a bunch of things. It comes apathy. It becomes you lose your ability to recruit better players, better coaches. You lose some NIL and donors, and you fall further and further, and you kind of cement yourself in the muck. It's really the longer you're in a spot in life, wherever you're at. And again, this is big picture. Wherever you're at, the longer you are somewhere, the harder it is to pull yourself out of that, right? If you spend 20 years not going to the gym, it's harder to get yourself in shape. If you spend 20 years gambling and wasting your money, it's harder to get yourself in financial shape. If you start to spend several years in the mediocre to bad category of the Big Ten football conference, it's going to be harder to pull yourself out of that. And again, in some ways, it's almost better if you bottom out, because then you know for sure we need to make a change and we're going to move on. If it's my biggest worry. And again, this is a show where I'm just kind of riffing a little bit. This is kind of like a fireside chat without a fire. If you've been a listener to the show for a long time, you remember my previous office where before I moved to this place, I had a fireplace in my background. This is definitely the type of show I would have the fire going, because this feels like a fireside chat. That's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is this program doesn't fully bottom out, but it becomes mediocre. And when you're there, it's hard to get the impetus to make a change because you're okay. And it's hard to get the backing to take a big swing because you're okay. It's my biggest concern. Let's see what's going on in the chat. And then I got a bunch of other comments as well. Well, Hannah says, geez, Mr. Clean. Well, thank you for noticing. Actually, dude, it's been a long day. I sliced my thumb shaving today. You know, a lot of people, they'll like cut their, I like sliced my thumb. So that's fantastic. Andrew Speed says, Colin Huang, please save us. That is the Temu billionaire who graduated with a business degree from Madison. I don't think he's that into football, Andrew, unfortunately. Alien Space. Do we still want James Franklin? Penn State might fire him. There is a question that came up, and this was on the Discord, and we might as well throw this up here now. Badger H says, would you take James Franklin over Fick right now? Chat, what do you think? I would. Franklin is a guy who it's not just the Penn. I don't know. I'm not a big James Franklin guy. He's the guy that won at Vanderbilt. You go back and you look at Vanderbilt. James Franklin has some of the better years at Vanderbilt in the last 25 seasons. He won at Vanderbilt. I think he makes pretty good coaching hires typically, but James Franklin is horrific in-game management skills. He can't win the big games at Penn State. Why would he do that at Wisconsin? I think the answer to this is, can I pick neither? No, I don't really want James Franklin as a coach. I'm waffling now. This is a really good question, Badger H. I think I would, but I don't love it, is my answer there. Now, let's see what else is in the chat. Alien Space says, even if we go 2-10, yeah, I'm telling you, I don't think there's a big appetite for a buyout. I just don't. And I think it would have to come off the rails. You'd have to lose 2-10 and get smoked in some games. Lose 2-10, but lose big to Iowa again. You would have to lose 2-10, go 2-10, and lose big to Minnesota. I think you'd have to come off the rails. I don't even know if 2-10 does it. I'm being completely honest. And I'm not telling you right now, there's two separate discussions here. Do I think you should lose your job if you go 2-10 in Wisconsin? And do I think it will happen? I think those are two very separate discussions. And I think a lot of what I've done on this show is I've kind of attacked it in the sense that I don't think Luke Fickell is going to be gone after this year. So let's rationalize our way forward, knowing he's going to be back next season, right? So I don't think he's gone even if we go 2-10. I'm going to be completely honest. Do I think you should? Yeah. If you come to Wisconsin and you go 2-10, you probably shouldn't keep your job. I think that's completely fair. This program has been too good for too long to go 5-7, miss a bowl, and then go 2-10 in year 3. I don't know, it's tough schedule or not. This program's been too good for too long to accept that. But again, that's my opinion then, and not what I think will actually happen. The buyout's a real thing at Wisconsin. People can hate that, love it, be ambivalent on it. It's not going to change the facts of it, right? Your feelings on it aren't going to change the actual facts of it. And the facts of it is the buyout is a big deal at Wisconsin. And quite frankly, it should be. You shouldn't be eager to part with $25 million or, you shouldn't be eager to do that. That should be a massive decision. You look at some schools like Texas A&M that make the decision really quickly. You should be probably a little more careful with your funds. You should have exercise a little more judgment. So I don't know. I think it's a tough discussion. It's not an easy decision. And for people who just say, well, you have to do it because this program's, I'm telling you right now, the money coming into the program is primarily driven by the media deal. It's primarily driven by the money that the TV stations at Fox is gonna pay the Big Ten. That money's already locked in. Whether Wisconsin's bad or not, they're gonna be getting the money from the TV deal, which is the primary financial driver they have. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the teams, like people talk about ticket sales. Ticket sales are not the biggest revenue stream for this program. It's the media deal. And the media deal doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're bad or good. You're getting the media deal. So there's not a gigantic financial impetus to move forward to be better. You get the media deal either way. All right, we got a bunch more to talk about, including new questions from the Discord. More thoughts on what can go forward in the season. What do I need to see? A couple scenarios, thoughts on Iowa. We got a bunch to talk about in today's Locked On Badgers late night edition. First, a quick second for our friends of the show. And as always, a quick second to say thank you for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. Today's episode brought to you by our great friends over at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness right now with their cross-training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's the most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, cross-training with your favorite instructors. Their new Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching, and it tracks your reps. It suggests the right weights for you based on your body type and what you're doing, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter, which is also going to make you more efficient. Peloton is a powerhouse. Let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Plus today at onepeloton.com. All right, let's jump back into this. See what you guys got in the chat. But I want to throw up some of the questions I got on the Discord, because I think there were some really, again, I was talking on the Discord. And if you're not in our Discord, I encourage everybody to come jump in. It's great conversation. I'll put the link up in here as well. But I wanted to throw a couple of these up there because, again, I think the community has some really good thoughts on some of this. This one right here, Badger Pilprin says, is it a negative? And I think this kind of strikes at some of the core of the discussion here. Is it a negative in college football to not give a head coach 4 years? Is it worse to give him 4 years if the team is regressing? This is kind of a sunk cost discussion, right? And I'm not saying it can't work with Fickell, but let's just hypothetically say if you invest in a company, if you invest in something and it's not working, no matter what you do going forward, you already lost that money. You already lost that investment. It's not going to work. So sunk cost kind of talks to, for those who haven't heard that term, it kind of talks about the idea the money's already wasted. And the sooner you move on, the sooner you can start recovering from wasting that money. That's kind of the sunk cost fallacy. So is Luke Fickell sunk cost? I actually don't think so. And I've gone back and forth on this. I think there is still potential that this could get turned around. I'm struggling to find it after the end of the Michigan game, after the Maryland game. I'm not sure it's sunk cost yet, to answer your question, Pilperin. To answer your, look, if he's not the guy, like if you knew for sure he's not the guy, does it make sense to give him a fourth year? No, it doesn't. It truthfully doesn't, because if you know for a fact he's not the guy, then the quicker you move on, I think the better off you are. Because if you have somebody inside your organization, if you hire somebody and they're not doing the job you asked them to do, if they're not performing at the level you asked them to perform, the longer they're there, the worse it's going to get, right? The further down they're going to drag everything. So the sooner you move on from that type of employee, the better, right? So I understand the point here. I think the only reason you want to have continuity is recruiting classes, it's talent, it's keeping players in-house. But I don't think that matters much if you have the wrong coach. I don't think that's a big deal if you don't have the right guy in place. You know, you're going to lose recruits. If you were to fire Luke Fickell, if you were to move on from this regime at the end of the year, midseason, whatever it is, you're going to lose players. You're going to lose players he recruited. You're going to lose players on this roster. But I just don't think that's a big deal, right? A new coach is going to bring players as well. You're going to lose players from Luke Fickell, but you're going to get new players in from whoever's coming in. They're going to have connections, whether it's at a previous stop, other recruiting coordinators, whatever it is. They're going to bring players with them. You look at Kirk Cinetti at Indiana. Like, he brought a lot of players with him. So whoever you're hiring, yeah, you're going to lose Luke Fickell's recruiting class. You're going to lose pieces on this team, but they're going to bring in pieces to replace that. So I know people talk about you want continuity to keep the recruiting classes in place. I just don't think that's a big deal. I don't think that really matters much in this era of college football, because every coach has their players, and you're going to replace them with another coach. So they're going to come with players. And quite frankly, if the result you're seeing on the field right now is with Fickell's players, maybe it's not the worst thing to lose a couple of them. I like a lot of kids in the 24-25 class. I like a lot of kids on this team right now, right? Nothing I'm saying detracts from that. But if ultimately the guy at the top's not the right answer, then the players on the team don't matter, because it's never going to work if the guy at the top isn't the right answer. All right, we got 34 comments here. Let me try to find some of these here. Will Hanna says he'd still give Luke Fickell 4 years. Hooger says we got rid of Chris in the middle of mediocrity, though. So would we not do that again? Not trying to be a jerk, just asking. Yeah, I mean, to Hooger's point, we did get rid of Paul Chris kind of in the middle of mediocrity. Would we not do that again? I think it's possible. I do think there's an interesting dynamic here. You know, Paul Chris, and the interesting dynamic is Chris McIntosh. Paul Chris was not Chris McIntosh's guy, right? Luke Fickell is tied to Mac. Luke Fickell was Mac's guy. And if you were to move on from Luke Fickell, let's just game plan this out. Let's play this scenario out. And Hooger, it's an incredibly fair point. But let's just game this out. If you were to move on from Luke Fickell, which was Chris McIntosh's guy, how would Chris McIntosh survive? How can you survive a $25 million mistake? In the world of business, if you make an acquisition, if you're part of a business merger, right, and you recommend this company, this person, whatever it is, and you bring them in, and that's your guy, that was your decision, you were in charge of that, and 2 or 3 years later, it doesn't work to the point where you have to move on, you're not going to keep your job in business. And I do think there's an element of, like, you know, Mac is going to advocate for Luke Fickell to continue the course because it's in his best interest for that to happen. This is nothing I've been told. This is nothing I'm reporting, but it just kind of makes sense. You know, the most important part of an athletic program at the Division I level is the football program. It's not even close. Like, you can have a great volleyball program, which Wisconsin does. Mac kind of inherited that. You can have a great women's hockey program, which Wisconsin does. Mac kind of inherited that. There's been continuity in men's basketball, and Greg Gard has been really good lately. Again, Chris McIntosh didn't make the guard higher. That's not a Mac guy. His one thing he really did in this program, outside of replacing the men's hockey coach, is Fickell. And if Fickell moves on because it doesn't work after 3 years, you have to pay a massive buyout, Mac is going to be gone. That's why it's different than the Chris situation, in my opinion. It was easier for McIntosh to move on from Chris because Chris wasn't his guy. This is much more murkier. It's much more difficult for him to do that because they think he might be tied to it, right? So it adds a layer for sure. JK says just trade Fick for Franklin straight up. I don't think anybody here would want Franklin. I just definitely don't think that would be. Alien Space says I bet Franklin would take the Wisconsin job. Yeah, I just don't think that is the answer anybody wants. Chance says, dang it, man, I don't know how to feel about all this. I think that's where I'm at. Like, this is that type of show. Like, it's tough to zoom out and figure out what the right move here is. And it's easy for people to say they want to move on or they want to do something else. That's a massive buyout. This program is going to struggle doing that. And next year, the schedule is going to get easier. The record's going to get better. I think there's a chance that he stays the rest of this year, stays next year. That record looks better. And then going into 2027, Luke Fickell's still here, but I'm not sure if we'll know if it's any better, right? That's the thing. That's the difficult part of this. I think there's a chance we go into 2027 with the same conversation. Still wondering, like, where are we at as a program? Is this going the right direction? I think we could still be there in 2027. I'll probably have more wrinkles. I'll probably have less hair at that point. Oh, goodness. Thunder says he'd take Franklin over Fick. He at least has a higher floor than what Fick brings. I don't know if Franklin has a much higher floor, if I'm going to be completely honest. And Thunder, dude, I think thanks for the comment. I'm not sure if he does. Like, Penn State has a ton of talent, and they just lost to UCLA, right? UCLA has been the worst program in college football, maybe through the first 4 weeks of the season, and they hung 42 on Penn State when he got to pick his defensive coordinator. I'm just not sure Franklin is a higher floor ceiling coach. I think he just has access to better talent. He can hire better coordinators. He can spend more money. I could be wrong on that, though. I could definitely be wrong with that. Let's take a second here. Bunch more of your comments, other thoughts over on the Discord that I wanted to get into. We're going to do that and more on today's Lockdown Badgers. But first, a quick second for your friends of the show, and a quick second, as always, to say thank you for tuning into Lockdown Badgers. Really, really do appreciate it. As always, today's episode brought to you by our great friends over at Square. Again, when you think about the neighborhood spots the places that make your neighborhood incredible, whatever they are, whether it's a local bar you go to that has maybe an amazing dartboard or foosball, whatever it is, or it's a local movie theater, local restaurant, cafe, breakfast place. I just got breakfast at the Lunchbox today in Shell Lake, which is incredible. Whatever your favorite neighborhood spot is, Square helps you connect to those places, because when you shop local, you do more than support that local business. You support the people in your neighborhood. You support your neighbors. You support that local economy, which is so, so important. It's organic. It's homegrown. Right now, Square helps you get to those places. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million local neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/locked-on-college to learn more. But before you do, go check out that neighborhood spot, that neighborhood joint that makes your neighborhood worth living. Over at Square, go check them out. Today's episode also brought to you by the great friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel's incredible. Again, NFL's going on, college football, NBA and basketball is going to be starting up in pretty soon. Major League Baseball playoffs are going on. It's all going on over at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you want to get started there, futures, parlays, teaser, spreads, any type of action you want, quick payouts. Unlike some other sites that I've used, you get that money really quick when you win. And right now, new customers, if you bet $5, you get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. You can use that on any type of action you want over at FanDuel.com. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com. Check out the app. Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Okay, let's get some more Discord comments in here, because a couple of really interesting comments that were brought up I want to get into. Matt P says, compare and contrast 2026 with Fickle versus without Fickle. What would it realistically look like? So let's get into this scenario here. 2026 with Fickle, what does it look like? I think 2026 with Fickle, you probably have some staff changes. Maybe another piece or two shuffles in or out. But I think generally the coordinators are going to stay the same. I don't think you'd move on from Grimes. I don't think you're moving on from Tressel. I think most of the staff around Fickle stays the same. I think that recruiting class probably stays mostly together. That class is pretty connected. Offensive line, I think, is going to be healthier. It's going to be better. Maybe you get quarterback luck. Maybe it's Carter Smith. And I think you win 7 or 8 games, six to 8 games, because that schedule honestly gets a lot easier and your team grows up a little bit. That's, to me, what 2026 in a good version looks like for Luke Fickell. What does it look like if you were to move on? This is where it gets fascinating, right? If you were to move on from Luke Fickell at the end of this year, I think the recruiting class, you'd have a roster flush. I think a ton of pieces on this team would be different. You'd have a new coach, new coordinators. I don't think anybody from the staff would stay on. I don't think anybody from the recruiting department would stay on, except for maybe like an Isaiah Green-May, somebody that has connections to the program. It would be a complete rebuild. And maybe that rebuild goes like Kurt Cignetti over at Indiana, but maybe it goes like a lot of other rebuilds where it's still 2 or 3 years away from being a year or two away. So I think if you moved on from Fickell, which in some ways with an easier schedule, maybe next year would make sense to do that. I think if you moved on, you would see a big rebuild. You would see most of this recruiting class leave. You'd see a ton of this roster leave. You would see the recruiting department leave. You would see new strength and conditioning director, obviously. You would see a whole brand new staff. And I'm just not sure I want that. I don't know if I want a rebuild. I want to see what this team would look like with a healthy quarterback and a healthy offensive line. I want to see it against an easier schedule. And I still think it could get turned around. But if Fickell's not here, you're going to see a complete rebuild is what it's going to look like. And how successful that would be would depend on the hire, who you brought in. Probably depend on a little bit of luck. It would also depend on NIL. Like, would they give that guy coming in enough money to compete right away? Or would it be kind of a slow rebuild? And then we get stuck into that 2 or 3 years with a new coach. Why isn't it better? Do we recycle again? That's where you get stuck in this cycle of never fully finding the right guy and moving on from people maybe a year or two too early. TBC says, why the fire Fickell train is bad for program right now. So he had a couple questions. Why would it be bad to fire Fickell right now? Recruiting, buyout, attendance, donations. I think recruiting, you lose your class. The buyout is $25 million. I actually think attendance, if you were to let go of Fickell now, I think you could see a spike in attendance because people want to see change, and I think they could get behind that a little bit. Donations is interesting. I'm not sure if you would see a spike in NIL or donations if you're making a coaching change. I think, in fact, most of your money is going to get spent on that coaching change, and people are going to be a little wary of committing to a program financially that hasn't exactly managed that money well. You haven't got an ROI out of it. So I think, yeah, I think there's a mixed bag there for sure. Brian S. says, what amount of turnaround do you need to see for you to be confident in the direction of a Fickle-led team? What would I need to see the rest of this year to be confident in Fickle? I think you need to beat Iowa. Let's just start tactically. You need to beat Iowa. The offense line has to continue to get better. You have to settle on a quarterback and find consistency there, which means it doesn't mean Hunter Simmons has to be great. It means you have to stop shuffling quarterbacks around. So beat Iowa, finish with at least 5 wins. If they finish with 5 wins, they beat Iowa, they settle on a quarterback, and the offensive line finds some consistency, and you finish 5-7, this is still kind of a disaster year because you can't finish 5-7 at Wisconsin and call it successful. But I think if you did that based on how we started, I would feel better about it. I would feel more confident heading into an offseason with an easier schedule on the horizon. Let's get some comments here. Will says tired legs. They have them already. Mark says Fickle isn't a good fit for the Badgers, point blank, period. That could be completely true. That could be completely true. Maybe it's you come from Ohio State. Luke Fickell came from Ohio State, where there was always a bit of a talent advantage. Then he went to Cincinnati, where he was able to build a recruiting department that recruited the most talented roster in that conference. And then you come to a school like Wisconsin, Wisconsin's really been run counter to those principles for the entirety of its successful football tenure. They've been really talented, but not the most talented. They consistently beat teams that probably had more natural talent on their rosters, but they outdeveloped teams, they out-executed teams, they out-toughed teams. And those aren't things you necessarily had to do as a Luke Fickell-led Ohio State team or a Luke Fickell-led Cincinnati team that developed one of the more talented rosters in the American Conference. So I think there is some truth in you might need a certain archetype to lead the Wisconsin program. And if you're used to having more talent and being that type of coach, this might be a tough fit. Thunder says, what do you think McIntosh combos with Fick are right now? Would love to be a fly on the wall for those. Yeah, I mean, I would too. I can't imagine there's too deep of conversations right now. Like this, you're in the middle of a season, right? And there's nothing McIntosh is going to tell Fickell or have a conversation with Fickell about that's going to have any substantial change. So I think those conversations are probably relatively minimal, would be my guess. They're probably votes of support. What do you need? How can we help? That would be my guess. Because again, I think there's a chance Mac is pretty tied to Fickell. So it's in his best interest for Luke Fickell to succeed. But there's nothing in season, I think, that Chris McIntosh is going to talk to Fickell about that's going to make any type of real difference. So I would love to be a fly on those walls too, to hear those conversations. But I don't think it's probably very deep at this point. Let's keep going here. Scott Frost is in the chat. We're not hiring Scott Frost. Well, Hannah, sometimes it's as simple as this. This program will not reach greater heights until they land a good quarterback. It's not more complicated than that sometimes. Now, that's on the staff, right? You can't just say, well, we can't be good until we find a better quarterback. Your job is to find a quarterback, develop a quarterback, coach a quarterback. And your job is also to have a backup quarterback. That's on the staff. That's what you have to do as a staff, is find the players, develop them, and put them in spots where they can be successful. And if you don't do that, you have nobody to blame but yourself. But this is also true. You're not going to succeed in college football with the level of quarterback play that Wisconsin Badgers have had the last 3 years. Some of that's just trash luck. That's people who aren't going to at least acknowledge that aren't being fair. You lost your starting quarterback 3 years in a row. That sucks. That's tough. But your backups also haven't been good enough. Their backups haven't been good enough, right? And I think there's something to be said about, maybe you found the wrong type of quarterback, or you're putting them in situations where they're getting hurt more often. I don't know. You have to take a look at it as a staff holistically, and what can we do better to A, keep our starters healthy, and B, which means invest in the offensive line, make your offensive line better, and B, have a competent backup that can go in and play well. And I think they tried to do that this year. They brought in, obviously, Danny O'Neal, Hunter Simmons. I'm giving them credit for that. Not a lot of quarterbacks, not a lot of teams in the Big Ten have a Hunter Simmons as their quarterback number 3 who can come in and play pretty well in Michigan. But ultimately, it's on the staff. It's on the staff to develop quarterbacks. Just cruising through the chats here. I got a few more from the Discord I want to hit. Let's get to the next one in the Discord quick. We talked about James Franklin. We talked about that one. Badger 1, I like this counterpoint. Badger 1 says there's definitely a narrative, and I've talked about timeouts already, so I didn't want to talk about it much on this show, but there's a narrative that Luke Fickell doesn't care because he didn't use his timeouts. Badger 1 says, so because Coach Fickell did not use his timeouts at the end of the Michigan game, he doesn't care? ? I'm not buying that. I think this is a fair comment. I don't think Luke Fickell doesn't care. I actually don't think that's the issue at all. I don't think you get to this point in your career and not care. I don't think you're a super competitive wrestler in high school and then suddenly you don't care. But there is some disconnect about in-game management. There is some disconnect about optics. There's some disconnect there that is not working. But I actually kind of agree with that. I don't think Luke Fickell just said at the end of the Michigan game, I don't care. Let's get out of here. I'm making my money. I don't think that's it at all. And I actually agree with Badgers 1 on this. I don't think that's the issue. I don't think the issue is he doesn't care. There's a disconnect between what he's trying to do and what's being accomplished. There's a disconnect between what he's trying to do and the actual in-game results. And it's almost like he froze in that moment. It's almost like I mentioned this with the Daniel Neal thing, right? When the first drive of the game against Michigan was one of your best drives this season, unequivocally. That's inarguable. They went down the field against Michigan, drive 1 and scored a touchdown against a really good defense on the road with their third string quarterback. And then the very next drive, they bring in Daniel Neal. And you can just tell that was scripted. It means like there's no they're not adapting to what's actually happening. They're not adjusting to what's actually happening. They're just like robots. And it feels like the end of this game was like that. The staff seems incapable sometimes of adapting on the fly, adapting to the situation. And it's a little deer in headlights. It's maybe a little coaching scared, whatever it is. I don't think it's a care factor. I would agree with this from Badger 1, but ultimately it doesn't matter if the end result is the same. Okay. DD Baller. I like this one here too. If the rush defense is as real as it feels, how do we build off that? Is there anything to build off with the offense? How do we replicate the success of the first drive against Michigan? Love this question, right? Because let's talk. Okay, so we're in the situation we're in. This is very much like a practical dad question, right? Like you're on a vacation with your kids, you're going to Mount Rushmore, you're going wherever. By the way, I went to Mount Rushmore as a kid with my parents. As a kid, that's not the most exciting thing to see. It's like this mountain off in the distance that you can't get close to. And they're like, well, what about the history? And I'm like, this is kind of boring. I respect it and I understand the significance of it, especially now, but as a kid, not the most exciting road trip. But this question here, it's like you're on a road trip, something breaks down, and instead of freaking out about the big picture, the dad in the car, the mom in the car says, okay, well, how do we fix what's going on right now? How do we build off this? And I think what you do, right, how do you build off the rush defense? I think you build off the rush defense being successful by dropping more in coverage, which is what Tressel did against Michigan, right? By saying, okay, we think that front 4, that front 7 can hold up. So we're going to give our corners even more help. We're going to play more umbrella coverage. We're not going to blitz as much. We're going to really give our corners and our safeties as much help as possible and just trust that front 7 can hold up and put opposing offenses in disadvantaged situations. I think for the most part, they did that against Michigan. How do you build off and replicate the success of the first drive against Michigan? You don't sub out your quarterback one drive after it happened, right? That's like, it's building continuity. It's building repetition. It's building rhythm. And when you are subbing out your quarterback one drive after what you just did, you destroy some of that. I'm not going to be able to sit here and think that doesn't have some type of impact in Hunter Simmons, right? It doesn't have some type of impact on the offense when you're flipping quarterbacks like that. So how do you replicate the success? Well, you don't change the quarterback. You keep the quarterback in that had that success. Now, he came in later in the game and Michigan shut it down. I think Grimes got a little predictive, first down run. And I think Michigan also, for lack of a better term, woke up a little bit. I don't know if they were fully ready to play the first series. It's something I talked about. It's something I talked about the Michigan guest with. I don't think they took us fully seriously until we scored that first drive. And then they snapped in a little bit and their defense line just kind of dominated our offense. So I think you keep Hunter Simmons in, you build off what he can do well, and then you don't get too cute. I think that's how you replicate first drive success. All right, couple comments here to wrap this up. Let me get to the bottom of these again. Appreciate everybody tuning in for a late night Locked On Badgers. A bunch of comments in here. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. Oh, man, there's so many comments I'm not going to be able to get to. Matt MVG says wall drug. The Black Hills. Yeah, I went to all those. We went to Wall Drug. We went to the Black Hills 100%. Bo Dragon says, I blame Graham Mertz. Dude is still getting us blamed. Our Mertz is still getting blamed for this thing. Joss says, love the fan talk. Let the coaches coach and the players play. Couch coaches are good entertainment. Yeah, I agree with that. Baron Von Trout says, I think if Leonard would have agreed to stay on as DC with Fickle, we'd be in a better position. That's a good hypothetical. I do think the defense would have been better. I'm not sure on a better big picture position because I don't think Leonard and Fickle would have coexisted for too long. There's not bad blood between them as far as I know and from what I've been told, but I think it's too many cooks in the kitchen. And the biggest issue has been the offense. So I kind of wonder if we'd be in the exact same spot. I could be wrong, though. Space Boy says, hey, Wisconsin, you may lament your recent history of bad quarterbacks, but I'm an Iowa fan. Our quarterbacks are historically bad to new levels. Yeah, there's no doubt there, man. I mean, it's funny. Like, we're almost becoming like discount Iowa in a sense. Like, our defense has to play great. We're going to need to get a special teams touchdown to win. Our quarterbacks can't play. Iowa's perfected the art of that. Wisconsin needs to get a little better in the other phases if that's going to work for us. Okay. We're going to wrap it there. Again, really do appreciate everybody tuning in. Thank you again. A bunch of content coming this week. Big Ten basketball media days. I'm going to be at those. I'm going to try to make basketball practice tomorrow. Locked On's meetup event this weekend in Iowa. Can't wait to see everybody down there on Wisconsin. And we will definitely talk later. Appreciate the absolute heck out of every single one of you guys.